corner office on the 17th floor had a view of the Chattahoochee that I'd helped pay for, in a roundabout way, by keeping the firm's data pipelines from collapsing for 26 years. I'd never been inside it before that Tuesday morning. Funny how the first time you see the view is the morning they take it away from you. His name was Donovan, 31 years old, married to the founder's youngest daughter the previous spring at a vineyard in Dahlonega that cost more than my first house. I'd been at the wedding, actually. Sat at table 40-something with the IT vendors and the cousins nobody talks about. He'd shaken my hand that night and called me the legend, with the same tone you'd use to compliment a houseplant. Now he was sitting behind a desk that wasn't his 3 months ago, wearing a quarter zip that probably cost what I make in a week, telling me my services were no longer required. "Roland," he said, like we were friends, "we're restructuring the data infrastructure team to be more agile, more cloud-native, more forward-looking." I let him talk. I'd been in enough of these rooms over the years to know the script. The HR woman next to him, somebody from corporate I'd never seen before, had a folder open on her lap, and the kind of face people put on when they're about to hand you a separation agreement. Behind them, through the glass, I could see 2 security guards waiting in the hallway. For me, 61 years old, 5'11", knees that ache when it rains. 2 security guards. "We'll be offering a generous package," Donovan was saying. 12 weeks. COBRA continuation. "We really value everything you contributed to ARC over the years." I waited until he finished. Then I said the only thing I wanted to say: "You're going to have a problem with the Riverside transfer at 4:15 this afternoon." He blinked at me. The HR woman looked up from her folder. "I'm sorry?" "Riverside Mutual. They settle through our overnight batch, but the 4:15 reconciliation feeds the SEC filing window. If nobody runs the manual override on the Tuesday cycle, the whole filing chain locks. By Wednesday morning, you'll have a compliance breach to report." He gave me that smile, the one I'd seen in his eyes the first day he showed up at our team meeting and called our infrastructure legacy spaghetti. A smile that said he was being patient with me. "Roland, we have a whole modernization team. I'm sure they can handle a Tuesday batch." "They don't know about the override," I said. "It's not in the documentation. I built it in 2009 after the Hartwell situation, and compliance asked me to keep it off the books for audit reasons. I'm the only one who runs it." "Then I'm sure you'll be happy to walk us through it," he said. "We'll have someone reach out." "Sure," I said. I stood up. "You have my personal number on file." I handed over my badge, took the envelope, walked past the security guards, who at least had the decency to look embarrassed about the whole thing. One of them was Marcus, who'd been working the lobby for 10 years. He used to bring his daughter by the building when she was little, and I'd let her sit at my desk and pretend to be a hacker. He wouldn't make eye contact with me. The elevator ride down took forever. 26 years in that building. I'd been there longer than the elevator had, technically. They'd modernized the elevators in 2011, and I remember because the new card readers broke for the first week and I'm the one who figured out it was a firmware conflict. I drove to Murphy's, not the Murphy's downtown, the one in Roswell, off Holcomb Bridge. My place. The booth in the back corner where I could see the door and the TV, both. Ordered a Buffalo Trace, neat, and the club sandwich. My phone was sitting on the table next to my keys. It was 11:47 in the morning. At 4:23 p.m., my phone buzzed for the first time. I was on my second Buffalo Trace by then and had finished the sandwich and the coleslaw and was reading the paper. The Falcons had signed somebody. The Braves had lost again. The weather was going to be fine all week. The text was from Donovan. "Roland, can you call me when you get this?" I turned the phone face down. At 4:51, it buzzed again, and again at 4:58. By 58, I'd stopped paying attention to the individual buzzes. The phone was just vibrating its way slowly across the formica. I flipped it over once, around 50-40, to count. 42 missed calls, 18 texts, 2 voicemails. I stopped reading them after the third one, which started with "Roland, I understand we may have parted on confusing terms, but that was as far as I got before I locked the screen again." The bartender, Dolores, came over with another Buffalo Trace I hadn't ordered. "On the house, hon. You look like you're celebrating something." "Tuesday," I said. She laughed and walked back to the bar. "Now," Here's where I need to back up, because the next part of this story doesn't make sense unless you understand who I am and how I ended up at ARC Financial Holdings in the first place, and why a 415 reconciliation that I built in 2009 turned out to be the loose thread that unraveled the whole sweater. I grew up in a steel town in western Pennsylvania that doesn't have a steel mill anymore. My father worked at the mill until 1983 when they closed it. Then he sold insurance until he died of a heart attack in his car in the Sheetz parking lot in 1996. My mother taught third grade for 41 years at the same elementary school I went to. They were both children of the Depression, and they raised me to believe that showing up early was the same as being on time, and being on time was the same as being late, and being late was the same as quitting. I learned how to fix a furnace from my dad when I was 11. I learned how to balance a checkbook from my mom when I was 9. Neither of them ever told me I was special. They told me I was lucky to have a roof, and that the way you paid for the roof was by being useful to somebody. I got out of Penn State in 1986 with a degree in business and a minor in computer science, back when computer science was still half a math department and half a hobby. Worked at a regional bank in Pittsburgh for 8 years. Got recruited down to Atlanta in 1994 by a man named Roy Pemberton, who was building what would become ARC Financial Holdings out of a converted warehouse in West Midtown. I was employee number 19. Roy was a career-era Navy man. Big, loud, profane, generous, fair. He didn't know anything about computers, but he knew how to find people who did, and once he trusted you all the way. He used to walk through the office at 6 in the morning with a thermos of coffee and stop at every desk that had someone at it and ask what they were working on. He was the kind of boss you'd run through a wall for, and I did more than once. Roy retired in 2014. His son-in-law from his older daughter, a man named Caldwell Beecham, took over as CEO. Caldwell was fine. Caldwell was a finance guy, MBA from Emory, knew the numbers, didn't pretend to understand the technology, mostly left us alone. Under Caldwell, the firm grew from about $300 million in assets under management to over $4 billion. By 2023, we were a serious mid-tier shop, doing custodial and clearing services for a couple hundred RIAs across the Southeast. Then in 2024, Caldwell's youngest daughter married Donovan, and Donovan, who'd been running a fintech startup that did something with cryptocurrency I never fully understood and which had burned through $40 million in venture capital before quietly winding down, needed a job. Caldwell, who I think genuinely loved his daughter and not so genuinely loved his son-in-law, but wanted to keep peace at Christmas, brought him in as VP of Digital Transformation. 6 months later, he was SVP. 3 months after that, he was running my department. I'm not a bitter man. I want you to understand that. I've had a good run. I've got a paid-off house in Marietta, a wife of 34 years named Joanne, who teaches kindergarten and still laughs at my jokes, a daughter in Charlotte who's a nurse practitioner, a son in Denver who builds wind turbines. I drive an 8-year-old Toyota Tacoma that I've never had to take to a mechanic for anything besides oil changes. I am not a man with grievances. But Donovan was a particular kind of person, the kind who'd come to the stand-up meeting and say things like, "Let's circle back on the synergistic opportunities here," with his eyes on his phone the whole time, the kind who'd schedule a one-on-one with me to ask why I wasn't being more of a culture carrier for the team, the kind who'd suggest, in writing, that we sunset the on-premise reconciliation systems and migrate everything to a third-party SaaS vendor whose sales rep, I later found out, had been his roommate at Vanderbilt. The first time he tried to push that migration through, I sent a 4-page memo to Caldwell and to the head of compliance laying out exactly why it was a terrible idea. Regulatory exposure, audit complications, the operational risk of moving custodial reconciliation off systems we controlled. Caldwell read it. Compliance read it. The migration got tabled. Donovan didn't forget. The second time he tried, 6 months later, was through a procurement angle. He didn't ask me. He just got the contracts to the legal team and tried to push it through as a vendor consolidation. I caught it because the head of legal, a woman named Patricia, who'd been with the firm since 2001 and who I'd helped through a divorce-era custody software thing she didn't know how to handle, flagged the contract for me out of professional courtesy. We killed that one too. The third time, he just fired me. So back to Murphy's, back to my phone buzzing across the Formica. At 6:42 p.m, the buzzing stopped. Not because they'd given up, because the phone had finally died. I'd been ignoring the low battery warnings for the better part of an hour. I left it face down, paid my tab with cash, tipped Dolores generously, and drove home. Joanne was in the kitchen making meatloaf. She didn't know yet. I'd been planning to tell her over dinner, calmly, and I did. And she sat down at the table and was quiet for a long moment. And then she said, "Well, we've been thinking about Italy." That was her. That has always been her. She didn't cry. She didn't get angry. She just adjusted the world to make room for the new information and started thinking about what came next. "They're going to call you back," she said. "They might. What are you going to do when they do?" I thought about that for a while. I ate some meatloaf, drank some iced tea, thought about my father in the Sheets parking lot, thought about Roy Pemberton walking through the office at 6 in the morning. "I'm going to listen to what they have to say," I told her, "and then I'm going to decide what I want." I plugged in my phone before bed. By the time I woke up at 5:30 the next morning, the way I always wake up at 5:30, I had 63 missed calls, 41 texts, and 11 voicemails. The most recent text from Donovan, sent at 2014 a.m., said, "Roland, I'm begging you to call me back. I made coffee. I read the paper. I watered Joanne's tomatoes. At 8 a.m. exactly, I called Patricia Yautord in legal, not Donovan, not Caldwell. Patricia, Roland," she said, picking up on the first ring. "I'm so sorry. Patricia, I need you to listen to me carefully. I'm not calling you in your capacity as ARC's general counsel. I'm calling you as someone who is no longer an employee. Can you have this conversation? Go ahead. You have a compliance breach. The Riverside reconciliation didn't run yesterday afternoon. The SEC filing window for the Tuesday batch is locked. By close of business today, you're going to have a Form 4 timing violation on at least 6 client accounts, and you're going to have a custodial reconciliation discrepancy that will fail the next audit." The line was quiet. "How bad?" she said finally. "On its own. Embarrassing. 6 figures in penalties maybe, a bad letter from Finray. The kind of thing that gets resolved in a year if you're proactive about it. Okay. But, Patricia," I poured myself more coffee, "if anybody pulls the thread on why the 415 override exists in the first place, they're going to find the 2009 Hartwell file. And if they look at the Hartwell file with 2025 eyes instead of 2009 eyes, they're going to find things that are going to be difficult to explain." A longer silence. "Roland." "Yes." "Are you threatening the firm?" "No, ma'am. I'm not threatening anything. I'm telling you what I know because I've worked with you for 23 years and you've never been anything but straight with me, and because I am a fiduciary by training and by temperament, and I do not believe in letting messes get bigger when they could get smaller." She let out a long breath. "What do you want?" "I don't want anything from the firm, Patricia. I genuinely don't. I want you to know what's coming so you can do your job. I want you to handle this the right way, and I want you to understand that if anyone from that building calls me asking me to come back to clean up, the answer is no. Not at any rate. Not for any package. I'm done. I would, however, be willing to speak to your outside counsel in a properly documented setting about the Hartwell file. If and when the time comes." I hung up, drank my coffee, took the tomatoes a little extra water because the forecast said it was going to be hot. Here's what the Hartwell file was, since you're going to need to know. In 2009, in the spring of that year, in the long, ugly aftermath of the financial crisis, ARC Financial had a problem. A client, Hartwell Capital, had been doing something with their custodial accounts that, looking at it generously, was sloppy, and looking at it less generously, was the kind of thing that gets you a visit from the SEC. They were front-running their own customer orders through a sub-account structure that exploited a timing gap in our reconciliation system. They weren't supposed to be able to do that. The system was supposed to flag it. Mine did, eventually, but the gap had been there for years. When we discovered it, I went to Roy. Roy went to the compliance officer at the time, a man named Eldon Crisp, who has since passed away. Eldon went to the audit committee. The audit committee, in the wisdom that audit committees sometimes have in the worst possible weeks of their careers, decided that the cleanest path forward was a quiet unwinding of the Hartwell relationship, the patching of the timing gap, which I was asked to do off the documentation, so as not to create a paper trail that would invite further questions, and a settlement with the affected counterparties that was charged to a reserve account labeled, and I am not making this up, legacy system adjustments. I did what they asked me to do. I patched the gap. I built the 415 manual override that has been running every Tuesday afternoon for 16 years. I kept it off the documentation. I assumed, because I was 45 years old and still believed certain things about institutions, that the audit committee had done what audit committees are supposed to do, which is to clean up the rest of the mess in a way that would withstand scrutiny. In 2017, I was doing some routine archival work, and I happened to pull up the Legacy System Adjustments Reserve account. The original settlement amount in 2009 had been $42 million. By 2017, that account had grown to $118 million and had been used to absorb losses from a dozen unrelated client relationships, all of which appeared to involve similar timing gap exploits that had been quietly patched and quietly settled. I went to Caldwell, who had been CFO at the time of the original Hartwell matter and was now CEO, sat me down in his office and explained to me, in the friendliest possible voice, that the Legacy System Adjustments account was a properly disclosed contingency reserve, that it had been signed off on by external auditors every year since its creation, and that he very much appreciated my diligence, but that I should perhaps focus my energies on the technical aspects of my role rather than the accounting ones. I left his office. I went back to my desk. I thought about my father, and about Roy Pemberton, and about the mortgage on the house in Marietta that we'd just finished paying off. And I made a decision that I have thought about every single day since. I wrote it all down. Every memo I'd written, every reconciliation report, every line of code in the 415 override, every account number that had touched the Legacy System Adjustments Reserve. I printed it out. I put it in a fireproof box. I put the box in a safe deposit box at a credit union my wife and I have used since 1995 and which has no relationship to Arc Financial or any of its banking partners. And then I went back to work for 7 more years because I had 2 kids in college and a wife who loved her job and a mortgage to finish paying off. And because I told myself the way you tell yourself things when you want to keep your conscience and your paycheck in the same room, that the patch was holding and the account was disclosed and the auditors had signed off, and who was I to play God with other people's careers? That's the part I'm not proud of. I want you to understand that too. So, back to that morning. Back to Patricia Yateward and the phone call. She called me back at 11:30 that same morning. Outside counsel for ARC, a firm called Whitford & Ainsley, would like to meet with me at their offices the following Monday. Did I have representation? I did not. I called an old friend from law school, a man I'd helped through a difficult software licensing matter at his firm in 2003, and who told me repeatedly over the years that if I ever needed anything I should call him. His name was Theo. Theo specialized in whistleblower cases. Theo told me that we would meet on Friday before the Monday meeting and that I should bring everything in the fireproof box. The next 10 days were the strangest, longest, most clarifying 10 days of my life. Joanne and I drove up to the mountains and stayed at a cabin near Blue Ridge that we'd been talking about going to for 15 years and never had. I read 3 novels. I ate breakfast every morning on a porch with a view of the Toccoa River and felt, for the first time in I don't know how long, like the inside of my own head was a place I wanted to be. On Monday morning at 9 a.m., I sat in a conference room at Whitford & Ainsley with Theo on my right and 3 attorneys for the firm on the other side of the table. They had a separation package in front of them that had grown, in the span of 11 days, from 12 weeks of severance to a number with a 7-figure in it and a non-disclosure clause that ran to 4 pages. I let them talk. Theo let them talk. When they were done, Theo slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a list of account numbers, 43 of them, with dates, dollar amounts, and reconciliation flags. The Legacy System Adjustments Reserve. The senior attorney for the firm, a man with a very expensive watch and a face that did not move, looked at the paper for what felt like a full minute. Then he looked at his colleagues. Then he looked at his colleagues. Then he looked at me. "Mr. Beake," he said, "could we have the room for a moment?" Theo and I went out into the hallway. We didn't say anything to each other. We just stood there looking out the window at a parking deck. After 18 minutes, I know because I counted, they called us back in. They called us back counted. They called us back in. The senior attorney did not have the separation package in front of him anymore. He had a yellow legal pad and a pen. "Mr. Beake," he said, "I think we need to start this conversation over." What happened over the next 4 months, I am not at liberty to discuss in detail, but the broad outlines are a matter of public record now, since the SEC enforcement action was announced in March, and since the Wall Street Journal did a long piece on it in April. ARK Financial Holdings paid a fine of $147 million. Caldwell Beecham was barred from association with any broker-dealer or investment advisor for 10 years. The firm itself survived, but in a substantially restructured form, with a new board, a new compliance regime, and a new CEO who, I understand, is a perfectly competent woman from one of the regional banks in Charlotte. Donovan was not charged with anything. He hadn't been at the firm long enough to be involved in any of the underlying conduct, but the Journal article mentioned him by name in the context of describing the period leading up to my termination, and quoted an unnamed source as saying that his approach to legacy infrastructure was characterized by a level of bravado that exceeded his understanding of the regulatory environment. I'd like to know who that source was. I'd buy them a drink. His marriage, I have heard secondhand from a former colleague who still keeps in touch, did not survive the year. Caldwell's daughter, who I always thought was a smart and decent person, has moved back to Atlanta and is, by all accounts, doing fine. Donovan, untold, has relocated to Austin and is exploring opportunities in the Web3 space. I testified at a deposition in November and again at a closed session in front of the SEC in January. Both times I told the truth, calmly, with my notes in front of me, and both times Theo was there. And both times I went home to Joanne in the evening and we had dinner and watched the news and went to bed at a reasonable hour. I am 62 now. I did some consulting 2 or 3 days a week for a couple of smaller RIAs that needed help cleaning up their own systems. I charge what I am worth, which is more than ARK paid me, and I work for people who are glad to have me. I am, by the standards of the kind of family I grew up in, a wealthy man, though I still drive the Toyota Tacoma, and Joanne still teaches kindergarten, because she would not stop teaching kindergarten if the house were on fire. My father used to say something when I was a kid that I didn't understand at the time, but that I think about almost every day now. He said, "The man who fixes the furnace doesn't own the house, but the house doesn't work without him." He'd say it when he was tired and a customer had been rude to him. He'd say it when the mill announced another round of layoffs. He'd say it like it was both a comfort and a warning. And I think now that he was teaching me 2 things at once. The first was that quiet competence is its own kind of dignity, and that you should never let anyone, no matter how loud or how well dressed or how well connected, take that dignity away from you. The second was that if the people in the house ever forget who fixes the furnace, the cold will remind them. It was Tuesday afternoon at 4:15 when the cold reminded them. And by Wednesday morning, when 63 missed calls were sitting on my phone like little flags planted on a battlefield that I had already left, the temperature in the corner office had dropped considerably. I'd like to tell you that I felt vindicated. The truth is more boring than that. I felt the way you feel when you finally finish a long, difficult project that you'd put off for years and that turned out to be exactly as hard as you'd feared. I felt tired. I felt sad about Caldwell, who I had once respected and who had made the wrong call in 2009 and had spent 15 years trying to make it not have been the wrong call. I felt grateful to Patricia Yolward, who had done her job. I felt grateful to Roy Pemberton, who had taught me what good leadership looks like, even if I hadn't always lived up to his example. I felt grateful to my father, in the Sheetz parking lot, who never knew that his son would one day be sitting in a federal building telling the truth about $118 million. I do not feel grateful to Donovan, but I do not feel anything else toward him either, which I have come to understand is its own kind of victory. A few months ago, I got a LinkedIn message from him. I almost didn't open it. But Joanne, who has always been wiser than me, told me to read it before I deleted it. It was 3 paragraphs. It said in summary that he had been thinking a lot about the events of the past year, that he had perhaps not appreciated the depth of institutional knowledge that I represented, that he wanted to apologize for any role he had played in what had happened, and that he hoped, if I ever found myself in Austin, we might grab a coffee. I read it twice. I closed the laptop. I went out to the garage and worked on the old motorcycle I've been rebuilding since 2019 and which I am now actually making progress on. After about an hour, I came back inside, opened the laptop, and replied. I wrote, "Thank you for the message. I appreciate you reaching out. I wish you well in your new endeavors." I did not say anything else. I did not need to. The work, sometimes, is its own answer. The people, usually, are not. That night, Joanne and I sat on the back porch and watched the fireflies come up through the grass the way they do in late June, and she asked me, the way she sometimes does, what I was thinking about. I told her I was thinking about my father. She squeezed my hand. We didn't say anything else for a long time. We didn't need to. The house doesn't work without the man who fixes the furnace. But the man who fixes the furnace, if he is patient and lucky and honest, gets to choose someday whether to fix it or not. That choice is the whole point. That choice is the only thing they cannot take away from you. I chose not to. And the cold, in the end, did exactly what cold always does. I've been turning this whole thing over in my head for almost a year now, and the conclusion I keep coming back to is the simplest one. Cause and effect. That's it. That's the whole law. Donovan didn't fire me because I was old. He fired me because I knew things he didn't know, and a man who is afraid of what he doesn't know will always try to make the knower disappear. Caldwell didn't lose his career because I testified. He lost it because in 2009 he made a decision that prioritized the comfort of the next 12 months over the integrity of the next 20 years, and the bill for that decision came due exactly when bills like that always come due, which is later and with interest. There's a temptation when something like this happens to call it karma or fate or some grand cosmic accounting. I don't think it's any of those things. I think it's just gravity. You stack $118 million of unacknowledged liability on top of a quiet little manual override that runs every Tuesday at 4:15, and you fire the only man who knows where the override lives, and the math does what math does. It falls down. It was always going to fall down. I just happened to be the man holding the ladder. What I want my children to understand, and what I want anyone listening to this to understand, is that the 3 things worth building in this life are the only 3 things they cannot take away from you when they decide you've outlived your usefulness. The first is your character. I kept the records in the fireproof box for 7 years, not because I was planning revenge, but because some part of me, the part my father planted in me in that Pennsylvania kitchen, knew that the day might come when telling the truth would matter more than keeping the paycheck. When that day came, I was ready. Because I had been quietly ready for 7 years. The second is your mind. The reason I had leverage at Whitford and Ainsley wasn't because I was angry. It was because I had paid attention for 26 years. I had read the memos nobody else read. I had understood the systems nobody else wanted to understand. Curiosity, sustained over decades, becomes a kind of armor. Donovan had no armor. He had buzzwords, which are not the same thing. The third is your steadiness. Joanne taught me this one. She didn't cry the night I came home jobless. She thought about Italy. The willingness to keep your footing when the world tries to knock you over is not a gift you're born with. It's a habit you build by getting knocked over a few times when you're young and discovering that the floor is not, in fact, the end of you. I am 62. I fix old motorcycles in my garage. I consult 2 days a week. I drink coffee on my porch and watch my wife's tomatoes grow. The corner office is not mine and was never going to be mine, and I do not want it. The view I have from where I'm sitting is better than the one from the 17th floor ever was. The house doesn't work without the man who fixes the furnace. But the man, if he's done it right, gets to choose his own weather in the end.